Dorian and Deepika, thank you so much for taking some time to join me on the business podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for having us on.
You guys are recording from Sydney, where we share an office. I'm recording remotely, but in Melbourne this week. So hopefully what folks will get out of this is any of the small business owners that are listening to the show, or even medium-sized business owners, that's principally the people that listen to this show, is people that run businesses. And you guys as a creative agency handling so many different facets of people's digital presence, marketing, website development, all this sort of stuff. It's really good. You guys are the first people who will appear on the show that have the technical expertise to explain how this industry works and how to pull it apart and build that presence online. So I've got a couple of case studies, little cheeky case studies in here too. But maybe just to set the scene, Deepika, can you tell us what Nibble does today? Like, give us like the bird's eye view of what you guys do, how you do it, and then I've got a few more questions to follow.
Cool. Yeah, look, I think what we'd call ourselves is a creative digital agency. And as we, talk further down the line, we'll probably explain more, because digital agencies now become this big wide thing. And, what could it mean? There's search, there's paid, there's organic, there's earn, there's own, and all that stuff. But I think our sort of sweet spot sort of sits in that sort of creative marketing, digital space, which basically means that we help clients, have a really good, solid digital online presence. It could be a website or, a product that they might have, and then we try and help them basically see how we can support them on their ongoing marketing needs from a digital channel perspective. So that ends up being, in our world, a lot of brands and businesses that are looking to, look to acquire leads online. So the digital channel is very important to them from an acquisition perspective, or that they've got a sales and marketing team, BDMs and sales teams going out. And then when they come back to that follow through from a B2B perspective, that digital experience is really important. So the role that we play is, making sure they've got the right marketing tech stack, they've got a great looking website, they've got the right content, the ongoing marketing makes sense. And then we bring in specialists as needed. So the needs of our clients might change, but really that's the sort of breadth of where we sit.
Would it be fair to say that you guys then are effectively kind of like a one-stop shop, in that even if you can't provide the service, you can connect people out to others?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's sort of been one of the things that most of our clients like about us. That word full service agency is becoming, less and less a thing, because there's so many like within digital, there's like 100 different things, and not one strategy doesn't suit another business. So when we recognize that maybe it's something that we're not really good at, we'll bring in someone that we know is really good at that, but then help support and walk through that process, or just, hand them over to someone trusted that we know would do a really good job.
Yeah. Dorian, I got introduced to you guys because we shared an office in Sydney, and I got to admit, like, knowing you guys for a little while now, I was like, how did these two meet and form the business? Like, where did you guys cross paths, and how did it end up that you guys would go into business with each other?
Yeah, we're a bit of an odd pair. So Deepika actually hired me at a financial services and event publishing business about 6 years ago now. And I sort of thought, having survived a couple of years working with one of the toughest bosses in town, it'd be a good idea to start a business with her. So yeah, we're working. Working together, and during that job, we sort of ran a big digital overhaul of all of their sort of services, websites, CRM, and did a lot of work with the internal and external design and development teams. And we'd almost done ourselves out of a job. We got to the end of that line and we were sort of looking for the next thing. And I knew that Deepika had previously sort of moved to Australia to set up the Australian arm of an Indian agency. And I thought potentially we could do the same thing in reverse. We went out and had a pizza, and I can remember we were at one of those pizza places where they've got one of those big tablecloths you can write on. So we actually wrote our first business plan on a tablecloth. And thinking back to that now, we had about probably 50 different service lines, which we had planned to do. We were going to do SEO, we were going to do PPC, we were going to do organic social, we were going to do everything under the sun, as most sort of small business owners would connect with. Like if someone gives you $5, you'll sing them a song when you first start a business. And that's sort of been like continually refined over time to where we are now. So we've got quite a specialised service offering across creative and development, and then sort of bring in those external partners, as Deepika mentioned, for things that we don't specialise in.
Dorian, maybe just ask a follow-up. So you guys like have won, I noticed in Deepika's email signature, there was you guys won an award and like recently, and I asked about your competition, and the competitors seem to be businesses that are much bigger. So I guess how do you guys do so well with such a small team? You've got your team, the two of you here, another one you said in Adelaide off air before, and in India, it seems like where you unlock a lot of that growth. But how do you guys achieve that?
Yeah, so like we've got a team of about 20 at the moment. So there's 2 of us in Sydney. We've got a project manager in Adelaide, and then I think 16 or 17 in Chennai in India at the moment. I think where we sort of do well, especially in that financial services space, is having a really strong understanding of the audience and the people that they're trying to serve. Like there's a million different businesses out there that can build a WordPress website, but I think people within financial services especially want to know that the people that they're working with understand the business challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day basis, and then can provide the right solutions that are going to suit them on a long-term basis rather than just being able to roll up a website.
Yeah. I think one other thing with financial services, like what Dorian said, we're not just designers or developers. That audience depth, specifically in the industry, that that Financial Standard Award has come in, like really understanding the Australian landscape, and that kind of came from the company that we used to work at as well. So, really understanding what superannuation means in this country, it's like much, much bigger than what people think. And when you meet a client, when you sort of start having those conversations in the beginning, you're not just talking about how many pages do you want on your website, or that immediately just changes the conversation. And then, there's no turning back from that point in terms of how we collaborate.
How do you guys find clients? So Deepika, Dorian mentioned that in the beginning it was kind of like we offer everything to everyone, just get them in the door kind of thing, which most small businesses start that way, right? But how do you guys find clients now, like businesses or brands coming to you? Is that the way it works? Or do you go out and find them? Do you pitch them?
Look,
how does that work?
We've been really lucky since the time we started. And I think it's primarily like 2 ways. One is obviously that financial services niche has really worked for us. And, once you do good work with one client, you get referred. And it's a pretty small, sort of well-networked industry. So that's been a really good focus. The other really good source of new business and leads for us has been our agency partners, because we work very closely with other agencies in terms of what their special, skill sets are, the kind of workflows around. So that's been another really, really good way. But yeah, it's literally referrals from these sort of networks and meeting people. We haven't, weirdly enough, being a digital marketing agency, done that much, marketing for ourselves.
If someone was listening or watching this and they wanted to find a creative agency, like, how would they do it? So how would you suggest like someone goes and finds these people? Is it like, does it typically happen through word of mouth, or are there places you can go?
My advice to people would always be to go with someone, ask around in your network, figure out who works in marketing. Obviously, the size and sometimes the referrals could be that, the size of the business that somebody refers to you is not really sort of working on both sides. So I think the first port of call would always be to sort of look within your network or ask out on LinkedIn and stuff like that before trying to, find someone off the internet. Having said that, there's also like all these sort of like small business communities and stuff online. Sometimes people even try starting, working with people on those freelancer communities like Upwork and stuff, which, can work really well. Your first logo, you know what I mean? You don't have to pay 10 grand for it. You could get it done on Upwork and get something for $200, and that could work really well as well. So you don't have to go that big bang immediately.
It's actually a perfect segue into the kind of hypothetical that I've got for both of you guys, which is, you know, a lot of people get overwhelmed with the whole concept of digital. They know they need it. They don't know what they need and how to go about it. So I actually have two scenarios. So I'm going to give these to you and then ask you guys kind of like how they should go about it. So one would be like a consulting business, and I've got my little case study here. This is someone who doesn't really need to sell anything or build a big online presence. They just need like professional landing pages and an email address and all that. So just imagine this person is a little bit tech savvy, but they're not like a programmer. So they can understand the basics of how a website works. Now, should this type of person or should this type of business be engaging with a creative agency or a developer, or should they be going with something else?
Yeah, so there's some really, really good sort of off-the-shelf tools. And if you have like quite simple requirements, you don't need anything customized. You have no real functionality other than potentially a form and a few testimonials or something like that on your site. There's some really, really good DIY options, things like Webflow, Squarespace, Wix. If you sort of get it, they have really, really beautiful, great looking templates. You might end up with a website that looks exactly the same as someone else, but if they're going to operate, the odds of that happening within the same sort of business that you're operating is pretty low. But they'll be sort of tested across all like browsers and devices. They've got really slick front-end animation. Often you can stand them up in, like, you'll be able to do it yourself in a matter of hours. And the other thing they do really well is they pull together sort of complex worlds that often people get a bit sort of overwhelmed with, like things like hosting, domains, licensing. You can pull that into sort of one singular payment every month. So you'll just say, oh, my website costs $15, $20 a month to stand up, sort of thing. Whereas if you're going through a developer, then you might have to buy, you'll have your domain coming from GoDaddy, you'll have your hosting coming from somewhere else. You might be paying a licensing fee for your website on top of that. So it can all get very complicated very easily, whereas these sort of DIY platforms just bring it into one sort of singular thing that becomes really easy to manage and look after.
Do you find, Dorian, just follow up on that, like a lot of, I know you guys work basically, not exclusively, but basically exclusively with WordPress, which is open source, fantastic ecosystem of developers and people around the world who understand it. Do you think WordPress is a good option for someone that's not that technically savvy, or would you suggest Webflow or Squarespace or something like that?
I probably wouldn't suggest WordPress if it's something that you're going to do yourself and you don't have a background in at least computers or technology in some way. For those reasons, it can become quite difficult trying to patch all these different things together when you don't have a single source solution. But when you're looking to go to that next step is where these platforms will potentially hold you back. So as soon as you want to have an integration, so you want to bring some information from another data source onto your site, you're going to struggle with things like Wix and Squarespace. I know Webflow's got some capability in that area, but something like WordPress, you're able to do that sort of next level up. Plus, as you say, it's super customizable, and you're then not tied to one single developer. Like there's WordPress is probably, I think it powers something like 60 or 70% of the sites online at the moment. You're probably going to have to fact check that one.
I know it's huge. Yeah.
It's some enormous proportion. So finding a developer that'll be able to work on that particular site isn't sort of doesn't become an ongoing drama as well.
Okay, so I've got a second one here, which is like another business. So this, I was trying to figure out like what's in that like next, like at that next level. So in this one, I'm imagining a small but successful, like a restaurant. I'm in Melbourne, so of course I'd say something like that. They want an online store to sell basic things. Like they might have like some merchandise, but they might want to organize things like cooking classes and doing a little bit of different, like where they need integration with a website and their physical thing in store. So they want to have like a booking system for reservations. Like that's all pretty commonplace these days. So like what steps should this business take? And are they the type of business they should probably consider going and engaging a creative agency? And then maybe I just have some other questions just around that.
Yeah, I think I'd say so. I think anything that becomes that sort of, mainstream B2C, you really want to think about what your brand looks like, which is why I always go like, if you're kind of running a services or a professional services businesses, you can take your time and work that out, because like in our case, it's very much a referral based business model. Whereas if you're going to opening a restaurant, cafe, you really want to get as much reach as possible and target the right audience, and branding and content is everything. So in that case, I'd say yes, definitely. It doesn't mean you go and pay, tens of thousands of dollars, but it's really worth working with someone professional, at least on the sort of branding, positioning side of things. But then actually getting things going, like whether it's Instagram or Shopify website, that could potentially be done, much lower cost. Because Shopify, again, it's like literally plug and play. People can just go and install a website, upload your products. But then, what that logo looks like, what the messaging is, that would, if unless you've got that eye for it, it's better to work with a professional.
Yeah. So in terms of like clients that come to you guys, so from a creative, from a development perspective, from whatever perspective, what is like the typical, like maybe like a minimum hurdle that you guys typically engage at, just to give a sense for our listeners where they would kind of get like the proper full service kind of business to business relationship versus say trying to DIY it. So do you guys bill monthly? Like how does that work?
It just depends on this, I guess, the maturity of the business in terms of where they're at and what their goals are. Like, so a lot of times we end up starting on a project, which means they're looking like sort of, really revamp their digital presence, build a new website, think things through from scratch. That means, it could start anywhere upwards of like 10K and go, could even go up to 100K depending on what they're trying to do. But we're not. And I think that's why, you asked earlier about we compete with bigger agencies and stuff, because we're quite flexible about where we sit in the cycle of where someone needs us. So sometimes it could be that they've got all of that. They just want, ongoing creative support or ongoing dev support. They want to inherit a WordPress website and support them. So that means we're talking, much lower spend. But it could be 1 year down the line. They might then say, hey, let's do a revamp. So we're really flexible. About how we work with people, but obviously from, being business owners as well, like it makes sense for us if we see a bigger opportunity further down the line. So we're not fussed about what that dollar number is when we start, as long as we see that as a business to business fit, it makes sense for us to work with that business to grow and understand the audience from a long-term perspective.
When say I'm a business listening to this and I want to engage you guys, I want to revamp my website, and then look at like positioning, marketing, all that sort of stuff next. How do you guys typically do that engagement? Do you go into like a one-on-one meeting with them, or do they send you a brief, or is it like here's a form to fill out? Like how does that process actually work?
Yeah, so it's typically fairly organic. Often we don't receive briefs as much as we'd love to. So they'll just be like quite an informal phone call, and you'll get some initial sort of requirements off a potential client. You'll go away, have a think about a potential solution, come back with a couple of different ways that you could potentially work through an option. And the conversation just sort of flows from there. Occasionally we do get a really good detailed brief, which I suppose if the client, that again probably comes back to Deepika's explanation of like how mature a business is. If a business knows, hey, we need to deliver a brief to get this exact output that we want, here's the steps that we need to follow. That's one way of operating. But I suppose those more organic conversations and that sort of looser flow, I suppose, works really well for businesses that aren't quite sure what they want and know they need something but aren't quite 100% across the way to go about it.
So I guess this is an interesting thing for me. So you said before that like, because I'm probably going to mention to you guys that in the next year, maybe two, I'm going to go through this process again for our websites. What would a good brief look like, Dorian? So like just in the general sense, like what are the types of things that you want them to give to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a bit of like walking a tightrope, writing a good brief. You want to give sort of as much detail as possible without sort of overwhelming in the sort of trivial in aim. What we often see, you can spot a bad brief straight away, is when someone has copied and pasted the about section of their website into the first page of it, which happens a lot. What is really helpful is getting context around the sort of background of the business itself. So project specifics are great, like understanding all the integrations, all the different page templates that a business might want, what the current state of their brand is, what their plan is for content, those sort of things. But if you can wrap that up in sort of general business context, in that we're A and we're trying to get to B, and what both of those states look like, cool. that sort of helps sort of provide the best sort of starting point, and businesses that sort of approach us in that way often get the best output because they're the most clear in what they want.
Yep. Yeah. I've had a few friends that have been founders, like non-technical founders or people who run small businesses, right? And what they'll do is they'll rely on like purely going outsourced, because I'll go like, here's the cost of Australian development and here's the cost of overseas development. Why wouldn't I just go overseas? But I guess maybe you can talk to some of the pros and cons of going direct like that when you're a non-technical person. I know there are a few, coming from a technical background. I know there are quite a few, but maybe you can explain that and some of the things that people should watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose it's not even necessarily really an onshore or offshore question. I suppose it's more a question of going to someone that you potentially don't know and don't trust to do a difficult, complex job for you. Doesn't matter where they are. If you haven't either got that referral or someone you know has worked with them, or they've been able to convince you during the pitch process that they're the right person for the job, you're probably sort of exposing yourself to a pretty decent size of risk, both in terms of the output won't be up to the standard you want, but more what we see just out in the market is like deadlines pushing out these things. I've seen websites take 12 months to get a full-page website built, just because you've got problems with the vendor or you yourself aren't clear enough in your brief and you've gone through 700 different internal feedback loops. Yeah. So it sort of comes back to that know and trust type thing. Like if you're going to go to someone you don't know, don't trust or don't have a connection with, there's a lot of risk involved in that. We've built an offshore team, but sort of early on we were working really closely with offshore development and design partners. And we had a sort of fantastic experience throughout all of that. But they were people that generally Deepika had worked with previously, or they were hard referrals, people we knew really well. So I think that's the sort of key to making sure that whole process works smoothly. The other thing I'd say as well is setting yourself up to have like key milestones and have sort of payment options around those milestones. So say if you're building a website, you'll want UX, UI design, development, and then go live. You might ask to have a payment plan structure where we'll pay 25% after design, 25% halfway through development, something like that.
Yep.
As well, if you're a sort of non-technical person, you want to set up some there's no point in going to a developer and saying, hey, I want to look at your code when you've sort of got no idea what you're looking at. Yep. If you set up a bit of a framework, as in you might ask them to do a demo with you every 2 weeks to see how an integration works or something like that. So you're getting regular updates and confidence in your provider that what you've scoped, what's in your project plan and what's in your functional spec is exactly what the final output's going to be. So having those regular check-ins and that sort of scheduling a process that you yourself will understand is probably the best way to keep yourself out of trouble in that regard.
I have a mate who built a website from scratch, not a WordPress website, but it was built in PHP. And he spent a couple of $100,000 getting this website built quite a few years ago. And he got to the end state, what he thought was the end state, a non-technical person. And he's like, okay, let's switch it on. They're like, oh no, we don't do that. We just build it, but we don't deploy it. We don't do any of that. We don't connect it to the front end. We won't do any of that. So then he had to pay someone else to connect basically what all the back end engineers were building to the front end. And then he, still non-technical person, got it up, but didn't know how to make any tweaks based on user feedback. So then he got VC funding, and the VC funding wasn't cash. It was purely through sweat equity, where they had in-house developers that they would support their companies with. And they were just totally not incentivized in any way to make decent improvements. And then finally a friend of mine and a friend of his, a mutual friend who was a really well-regarded software engineer, looked at it And he's like, mate, it just looks like spaghetti. Like, he's like, I don't know what's going on underneath the surface here. And I hear like horror stories like that where people go the cheaper option when they probably should have gone with someone who is more, I guess, credentialed and well respected in the first instance to get what they truly wanted.
Yeah. I mean, 100 grand is the cheaper option. Sounds a bit fairly concerning.
Yeah. Well, actually, I think it was more than that, to be honest. I actually think it was more than that.
And on the other side of the spectrum, we've actually come across people that, they're reluctant to go with the cheaper option. So they go with a more expensive option, like for some reason, in some industries or, even in startup world, WordPress is not cool enough, right? So people go like, oh, I want to get my site on this and that. And they do all these headless CMSs and stuff. And then suddenly they're going like, oh my God, that's actually costing me like 25 grand a year on like whatever, some bespoke licenses and this and that. And you're like, what difference does it make? Like WordPress could have done that same job. It's just like, I guess people just get caught up in, certain trends and stuff like that. And it's not always, the right solution. And you end up spending so much money in the long run. When you'd rather go with something pretty tried and tested.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's probably a good sort of tip during the briefing process is to have a plan about what happens after you go live. So Owen, in your example, your format hasn't even got to the go live state. But once you go live, you don't necessarily want to be tied to that agency or that developer because they might get busy. I mean, a million different things could happen why you wouldn't want to work with them moving forward. If you make sure that you sort of got your options open as soon as you've gone live, as soon as that project's finished, then it sort of de-risks the whole situation.
Because you know what you're going to get, and
I mean, it's exciting. It is tempting to try the next new shiny thing, but if your whole business depends on it, and then that can be pretty risky.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, guys, I've got like a bit of a game that I wanted to play with you. I did this with someone recently. Just to try and tease out some insights. So again, I want you to imagine two businesses. One is a Sydney-based builder and there's another is a Brisbane-based cafe. I chose just really simple examples so people could grasp the general gist of what those businesses might do. So a Brisbane-based cafe and a Sydney-based builder. Now, if I gave you $10,000, we'll just call them fake Rask dollars, and you have to market these businesses. So you have to pick one strategy or portal and you've got $10,000 to try and grow awareness, leads, whatever, for these two businesses. What would you pick? Maybe ladies first, Deepika. We'll start with you. How would you spend that money? How would you kind of get creative and use that?
For the Brisbane-based cafe, did you say?
Yep.
Yeah, I think with the Brisbane cafe, I'd probably invested on a sort of Instagram sort of social strategy. And that could mean, anything from like, hiring a content strategist or coming up with ideas, getting some footage done, like doing a 3-day shoot and, getting a whole bunch of, photography and little videos that could then help drive maybe a 1-year content plan on Instagram. And then that can be repurposed later down the line to, use to basically sponsor posts and do paid strategy on social. But I think for anyone in that cafe restaurant business, like having like really, like your user generated content in the food space is so good already that if you're an actual business, the content means everything. So I'd really spend my 10 grand in like investing in creating content that I could potentially use for a year.
Yeah, I like that because you're getting so much more duration out of the spend by doing something like getting that collateral. Yeah. How about you, Dorian?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I'd probably approach it slightly differently. So like your local cafe, Owen, you probably chose it largely due to where it is.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to attract people in that area, like you're looking for a way to sort of generate foot traffic, I mean, potentially you could look at a local SEO campaign, which is where people are searching for things like food near me, Thai food near me, cafe near me type thing. Sort of optimizes your Google My Business profile to make sure that you're showing up as high as possible within those near me type searches. You potentially won't get the person who goes to the same cafe every single day to get his morning coffee, but you might get some people on holiday who are probably going to sit there and spend $60 having breakfast and have 3 or 4 coffees. So that'd be my sort of approach.
Dude, does that work on Facebook as well, or is it typically like a Google driven thing?
Local SEO is a Google thing, really. It also works on organic search, but it's more based around those like typing a near me type search into your like Google Maps.
Yep. Cool. I like it. So two totally different things, but both I can see why they would work. How about for a builder? Like we probably have a lot of builders. I haven't surveyed the audience yet. It's probably too early for that, but I imagine we have a lot from construction or building or trade people. If someone was thinking of doing that, maybe we'll go the reverse way, Dorian, start with you. What's something that maybe you would consider doing?
Yeah, okay. So I think with this one, I think potentially you'd be looking for ways to build up your trust factors as much as possible. Like people are looking for a builder. I'm assuming this is a residential builder. You're building houses. People are about to make an enormous financial decision, so they've really got to know and trust you before they're going to sort of pull that trigger. I'm just so many steps away from building a new house that I'm sort of the outside of this target market. But I don't think people will jump onto Google and look for like builders in Sydney or builders in Melbourne. I don't think that process sort of work that way just because you're going in so cold. So I think like setting up some sort of referral program where you're incentivizing your current customers to refer you on to their friends or potential clients for you could be one way of doing it. And I know there's sort of like lead generation type platforms. I think there's something called High Pages, which I'm sure your listeners will be aware of. Getting on those sorts of platforms where there's a sort of review-based trusted service that are feeding you qualified leads rather than going in an area where you've got to sort of build and generate your own sort of social proof.
Yep. I like that. Yeah. And High Pages is definitely one that I know a couple of mates of mine use a lot. And even if that's just in the beginning, right, to build that referral network and then spin it up. This is actually a really hard one to come to think of it because it's quite a hard thing to market now that you mention it with the trust. But Deepika, do you have anything else to add there?
Yeah, I actually think a website as well is worth investing in and kind of showcasing or pulling in all of that sort of trust factor and testimonials and also your work. Because choosing a builder is literally like choosing a doctor. Like people's homes are like everything to them, and if it goes wrong, it's they're in some cases their entire life savings. And I also think that partnership element, because builders rarely work in silos. They're working either with architects or with other kinds of tradies. Like how do you build that? Like how we've got a little agency network. I'm just sort of thinking like how does a builder build that nice little community where that whole sort of group of people can sort of support each other to build that trust factor together. So like I guess sometimes the builder and architect could potentially have some sort of marketing strategy that works together and sort of leverage off each other's experience and client base.
I like that too because it's much more a softer industry, isn't it? In terms of, it's not like you have like an e-commerce business where it comes in and it goes out. Like the lead comes in and it goes out with a product. It's really simple to just feed that funnel. It's a lot softer in terms of relationship building and that type of thing. And I deliberately chose something that wasn't financial services, which I know is your bread and butter. You deal with a lot of like fund managers and big financial brands, including primary markets.
Actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, it's just one of those things, right, that like where I am quite envious of you guys because you guys can take your craft and you can apply it to different industries as well. And we got a glimpse of that just then. We have different perspectives on the same problem. And that's where it's like getting creative and trying to implement and execute. Dorian, if people are listening to this, if anyone's listening to this runs a business and they know they need to take sort of their digital strategy seriously, whether it's from websites through to marketing through to anything like this, creative. What's the typical way that they would approach you guys at Nibble, and how can they get in contact?
Definitely. So they can get in contact via our website. So that's just nibbledigital.com.au, or drop us a line on LinkedIn. You can just follow the Nibble Digital page or just add either one of us individually, and we'll generally get back on the same day.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, guys, this is it's been a good foray into the space of building a better business online. And I really appreciate you taking some time out of your busy Wednesday to join me online.